Good evening, everyone. My name is Rishab Ghosh.
I'm Shashank.
Yep, we can hear you
Okay,
and
all
see
right,
the screen.
okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rishab Ghosh.
My name is Shashank.
I'm Jaden Lim.
And I'm Jaden White.
And today we would like to present our research on a diffusion Monte Carlo based deep neural network for the analysis of ground state stereoisomers. And
The main kind of rationale for our project really stems in the problem we identified. And this kind of pertains to this whole idea of performing energy calculations, which have proven to be extremely crucial in many biological industries, such as pharmaceutics and protein analysis, to name a few. Now, the actual problem arises when calculating these energies using the Schrödinger equation, which is a common approach. Now, when we're working with larger molecules, those that have multi-electron systems, which is of course a large number of molecules, there actually is no closed form solution for the Schrödinger equation. Now, what this exactly means is the Schrödinger equation does not accurately calculate these energies when accounting for the electron interactions. Therefore, we would have to approximate them. And that's kind of a great segue into why our project even exists. Now, this kind of, like I kind of said, segues into some previous work we have actually already completed. Essentially, in this work, we created a novel algorithm which randomly created conformational isomers of acyclic alkanes using a Monte Carlo process. And we noted specific patterns in the energies of these molecules as we change the polar and azimuthal angles of these molecules. This can kind of be seen in the table on the top right. Now, the energies seem to grow as you actually decrease that angle bound, and this is because of electron repulsion increasing the overall energy of the system. Just to kind of reiterate, this whole idea that we did was we used a combination of classical Monte Carlo and geometric clustering algorithms to calculate the energies of different molecules while also accounting for the electronic repulsion and other forces. Now, then we kind of identify these patterns that I previously discussed. And the big problem we still saw with this work was the computational expense. We saw a polynomial increase in evaluation time when working for larger molecules. In our case, we didn't work with that big molecules, but we know if you wanted to expand the scope of this research, this would be a huge computational expense. And this is a great piece of rationale as to why we kind of shifted towards a quantum Monte Carlo approach, which we'll be discussing in future slides.
So when it comes to our methodology, when it comes to our motivation of our project, our two main focuses are the expansion of scope from our previous work. Now, specifically, we want to increase and improve the accuracy for our energy calculations. So for our energy calculations of the Hartree-Fock method and also the Møller Plesset perturbation theory too are good, but they are fast, but they are not as accurate as they could be. And then our second point is that we want to include larger set of molecules. So we want our set of larger molecules from our previous research worked with conformational isomers of acyclic alkanes specifically. However, we want to broaden the scope to be applicable to many different scenarios. Hence, this is why we are using stereoisomers. And then we also want to address the limits of computational expenses. So specifically are decreasing our runtime, and that's going to be ran through our machine learning model.
And so, as Shashank mentioned earlier, in our work revolves around trying to determine the energies of molecular systems with more than one electron. And unfortunately, the Schrödinger equation works for a single electron system, not necessarily for multiple electron systems. And so what we do is we utilize what is known as a self-consistent field method approximation, or SCF method for short. And essentially what this does is that it takes an initial guess at what the wave function orbital would be for a molecule. And that's guessed by using the 3D coordinates of an atomic nuclei and other factors such as that. And so it initially guesses the molecular orbital. And then through that, it it essentially treats the entire system as independent electrons. And in that case, it can solve the Hartree-Fock equation to keep finding the energies of and the wave functions of the electrons until they converge to about the same thing as the initial guess. And so this is a great way to approximate the energies of multi-electron systems. However, it doesn't necessarily take into account the electron correlation energy. And so if you look on the right, the reference for it, that's the equation for Hartree-Fock energy, which stems from another approximation known as the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. However, that's not necessarily as important as the bottom two equations. So the middle equation is talking about the Hartree-Fock energy, and then moving past that is the Møller-Plesset perturbation theory energy, which includes a perturbation factor to account for that electronic correlation. However, it's still not enough because while these are all great ways of determining molecular energies, these are only approximations of what the ground state energy of a molecule could be, and not necessarily what it actually is. And so we utilize something known as quantum Monte Carlo, which essentially solves the Schrödinger equation exactly using a stochastic process, which I will get to later. And in specific, we used a diffusion Monte Carlo process with that accurately, which provides highly accurate molecular energies for multi-electron systems, still accounting for the electron correlation energy.
Okay, so because we want to like build a machine learning model to save time on these calculations since they're very computationally expensive, our first step is to generate a data set using the QM7X data set. So we are going to run the diffusion Monte Carlo on molecules from the QM7 dataset to create our own dataset with molecules and their respective energies calculated from the DMC algorithm. And then after that, we're going to use that as training data for our machine learning model. So we don't need to run the DMC calculations again. And yeah, so our goal is just to first create a data set with the DMC energy calculations, and then train our own machine learning model and tune it. And then eventually, once we have that finished, we can hopefully test our model and compare its accuracy.
This segues to kind of like the first portion of our methodology, and this relates to the QM7X dataset. Now, we particularly chose this dataset for a couple of reasons, and they really stem around the amount of sheer number of molecules that we can actually work with. Now, there are 42,000 distinct molecules, which are stereoisomers, within this dataset. And for each one of these molecules, there's over 100 different equilibrium and non-equilibrium structures. This roughly results in a total of course, 4.2 million kind of configurations. Now, each one of these configurations or structures has its own physiochemical properties, and this data set showcases 42 of them. For example, the atomic coordinates for each atom, the total dipole moments, the molecular polarizability, and the Hirschfeld charges. Now, there's one thing just to keep in mind about this data set that really addresses the type of molecules we're working with, and it's the fact that these chosen molecules are comprised of either nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur, chlorine, hydrogen, target. Lastly, while it is true that the dataset also provides tightly converged DFT calculations, these are still approximations, like Rashad mentioned. So therefore, using diffusion Monte Carlo is far more accurate as it accurately solves it rather than approximating it.
Close to 10, 5 to 10.
Now, moving on to the methodology behind the diffusion Monte Carlo process itself. Essentially, what it does, essentially the way diffusion Monte Carlo works is that it solves the Schrödinger equation in imaginary time, which is
Locked it
on
and
the
locked it.
top right. So that's the Schrödinger equation in imaginary time.
But I felt talking it's too much.
Essentially, it works in a similar fashion as the previous Hartree-Fock Plesset energy methods work, in the sense that there's an initial trial function, wave function that is guessed, and based on that, Monte Carlo simulates.
Okay, could you hold for just a minute there? Ashitra Mahadev Devyu, can you please mute yourself? Thank you.
Okay.
Continue.
So essentially how the diffusion Monte Carlo process works, as I was mentioning, is that it involves solving the Schrödinger equation in imaginary time. And so firstly, what it does is it takes in an input with trial wave function. And using that trial wave function, it will use that wave function to apply it to something known as walkers. And you can see somewhat of a depiction of what walkers look like in the middle figure. Those circles, dot-looking objects are essentially what you can consider as walkers, and they represent the electronic wave functions in a specific molecule. Now, the reason for it being in imaginary time is that as you continue on with different time steps, basically allowing the walkers to evolve over time to mimic how an electron will go down to lower energy states after a given period of time, the walkers imitate that through many different time steps, which can be seen on the left part of the figure where you have that tau symbol. And so the reason for it being an imaginary time is because since Schrödinger's equation in real time provides sort of oscillatory solutions, solving the equation in imaginary time allows for the solutions to be given in it'll give it in how do I say this? In a way that it'll be exponentially decreasing, allowing for the energies to actually converge to a given value. And that can also be seen in the figure itself, and the hyperbolic shapes on the top and bottom somewhat represent energy potentials. And as you go down to the very bottom, at the very bottom, you can see all the walkers sort of lying on the same line, which showcases how the entire system has converged to a specific ground state energy. And now specifically what we will be using for diffusion Monte Carlo calculations for our data set is specifically 6,500 different walkers with about 60,000 different time steps. So you can imagine about 6,500 of these little dots, and each of them evolving about 60,000 times to converge to a solution. And as mentioned earlier, the necessity for this is that it provides highly accurate energy calculations for many body systems, where most methods either approximate or sometimes even can't actually provide a definite solution. And lastly, I just want to point out that the equation on the bottom is the actual way of producing the energy, and it's simply summing over the entirety of the electron, like the space, and the density is on the denominator, and the numerator essentially represents all the converged walkers and what their energies are. So
Now, when it comes to our methodology for our machine learning model, our machine learning model is based off of a deep neural network. As you see in the bottom figure on the right, with the different boxes and strings, this is what a deep neural network is. So our machine learning model is trained on a diffusion Monte Carlo energy dataset. And specifically, the deep neural network is going through 5 different layers. And those 5 different layers have different parameters which it would be filtered upon. And as we input specific molecules into our machine learning model, it will essentially go through these different layers, specifically our atomic coordinates, our MP, our dipole moments, and our HFC method, and then it will produce an output for our stability. So as you see on reference 9 and reference 10 being our atomic coordinates, and reference 9 being our binding moments, we can see that this method will essentially allow us to filter our molecules to our absolute best to find the best stabilization when we're inputting these different molecules in, because we would like for a machine learning model to be able to test multiple different molecules, which will show its diversity. And these specific, or pretty much our whole machine learning model is based off of TensorFlow and its library. However, we are thinking of switching over to PyTorch in the sense of being able to strand its longevity in terms of how it produces graphs and overall its performance when it comes to inputting these molecules. And our goal specifically for our machine learning model is because of its efficiency, but we also want to have the opportunity to predict energy of any given molecule and classify its stability. So as aforementioned, the 2 boxes that you see on the far right that are blank will be binary to what it will be classifying the stability as. And that will pretty much be based off of the different parameters and layers that are all hidden throughout the deep neural network, which can be also correlated to a black box and the different configurations that happen that are not seen, but are also outputted based off of the input.
Okay, so in conclusion, after we create our model and train it, we want to compare our model to the actual calculated DMC energies to really see how accurate our model is, and also compare the runtime to the DMC algorithm, because just to compare how much time we save and if it's really worth it to use the AI model when predicting these energies. And our research would be able to help increase efficiency of drug design and also help decrease like the calculation times for all these chemistry calculations and simulations. Okay, so we would like to thank our PI, Dr. McMahon, for supporting us on our project, and also ASDRP for just allowing us and helping us perform our research. And also another person who has really helped us a lot with our current research is Dr. Kent from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And along with that, we have all our other members, for members who aren't here in the meeting, and also other members who have left the group. They've contributed a lot to our work, and we wouldn't be here without them.
We would also invite you to scan this QR code that has all of our references for this presentation that we use to provide you this information. This QR code links to a PDF where you can look at all the different websites and links that we used for our references and our pictures.